Hi, and welcome to the Friday Hangout, the show where we talk to digital marketing about news we found fascinating this week and experts we find interesting, or even fascinating and interesting. Today we're talking to Gabe Zickerman, the chair of G Summit and author of the new book, The Gamification Revolution. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And with me are my co-hearts every week, Janet
Cohorts. Cohorts.
I love being Steve's cohort. So there you go.
Cohorts.
Good morning, everybody.
I want to be everyone's cohort too.
Cohorts.
You will be after the show.
Cohort.
Officially after the show, you will.
And of course, Adam too.
Adam 2.
Adam 2.
Who's Adam 1?
Really. So, Gabe, thank you so much. I know you're very busy, and I know that you guys have a big conference coming up here in San Francisco, which I'm excited to be attending and a chance to meet you in real life.
Yay.
Are you guys all ready for that?
Yeah. It's it's always a big undertaking. We've done G Summit for 4 years, and when we first started, we said let's get everyone together who's working on gamification, and we didn't know what it would be like. And that first year, we had Jane McGonigal launch her book "Reality is Broken," and pulled in these people who were just like, hey, I don't even know that this is called gamification, but I'm doing this cool game stuff in my company. And now, 4 years later, it's like we got 55 speakers, and it's 3 days, and there's all these hands-on things. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of our keynotes this year.
Whoa!
It's really grown a lot. Yeah.
I'm not sure what he has to do with gamification, but I am all over that.
Well, I want to go now even more than before.
Let me tell you what he has to do with gamification. So our business, the business of gamification, is the business of changing people's behavior. And at the core of behavior change, a lot of the things we're trying to do are educate people and teach them new things. I think that Neil deGrasse Tyson is, in this era, the world's foremost expert on getting people interested in difficult subjects. And a lot of what our audience needs to do is teach people how to do difficult things like a job, or like a difficult job, or learn math or science, or get engaged with a particular product or service. So I think he has a lot to offer, and he's excited about it because people never ask him to do methodology talks, and he's going to be doing it like the Neil deGrasse Tyson methodology talk, which I think
that's super cool.
Yeah.
He's a fascinating guy, and I think in this age of scary science illiteracy, it's nice to see him anywhere. He's kind of like the edgier Carl Sagan, which is okay with me.
Well, so you were talking about, Gabe, you were talking about what gamification is, and I find it really interesting as somebody who tries to keep on the pulse of what's going on with the tech side, and in my opinion, design in general is about creating an intent behind anything. It doesn't mean it has to be graphic design. It doesn't mean it could be experience, right? The experience you're designing, the reason you use the word design is because you're creating you have an intention that you're trying to get out, an outcome. And we actually did some work for a gamification company out here, one of the major ones, and it was my first real experience to see how these folks were implementing gamification for businesses. They were doing it for some major publications, for some television studios, and then ultimately also for some enterprise companies internally. And the more that I was exposed to it, the more respect I had for it in comparison to something like Foursquare, where initially everybody's like, oh, gamification is just badges. But when you see how each of these components are implemented, they really have valid reasons for being implemented and valid ways of motivating folks. Can you give sort of a use case as to how somebody might use gamification in a real-world use case?
Well, great. I mean, there's so many examples, right? Gamification is being used across such a wide spectrum. It's being used in education. It's being used in healthcare. It's being used in marketing products and services through the loyalty prism, whether that's at airlines or that's with consumer packaged goods. It's also surprisingly to a lot of people being used to transform the world of work. So it's used in a lot of companies, and there's about 50% of the activity in gamification is actually the use of it to engage employees in their jobs. Because what many people are not surprised about is this idea that your employees to work and they're not necessarily spending, focused on the job and doing the best work they can, and attrition's really expensive. And
No,
even from,
really?
yeah, it's shocking, right? People are looking at Facebook and playing Candy Crush while they're at their job. But also this is relevant even for marketers in a sense, because in many cases, marketing programs do involve the front line, especially in organizations that have retail presence, right? So often your marketing campaigns touch the front line. So in so many ways, gamification is being used for all of these different things. And, there's lots of really super cool examples. So one that probably many folks are familiar with that I think is an interesting case study is Duolingo, which is an app that teaches you how to learn a new language. And it's
free.
I love Duolingo.
Yeah, so you guys are familiar with it, right? And I apparently 250 million people have played Duolingo at this point, making it, I think, the single biggest educational app ever, certainly in the iOS store. And so one of the interesting things about Duolingo is it uses the premise of gamification. It makes the process of learning a new language fun. And in doing so, it also is translating the internet. So this is the thing, the creator, a guy named Louis von Ahn, this is something he's quite famous for, which is using crowd work and gamification to kind of combine and create new cool things. So that's one example that many people have seen. And from a marketing standpoint, one of, I think, the most profound examples is Nike Plus, which now has about 16 million active daily users, which is a very big number considering how slothful Americans are. That's a lot of people moving. And one of the interesting things about Nike Plus is that from a marketing standpoint, it really fulfills the kind of like Mad Men vision all the way to its logical end, which is instead of telling consumers that your product or service will help them achieve their personal goals, Nike Plus actually does it for you. It's a piece of hardware and software. You wear it and you move with it, and it's uploaded to the internet. It gives you positive feedback, shows you how you're doing, gives you comparative examples, and it helps you actually achieve your personal goals. So it's not just the brand saying, use our product and you'll get where you want to go. It's the brand saying, let us actually help you get there. And oh, by the way, we also sell shoes and shit.
Mm-hmm. We actually had a really good example of this kind of in real time last week, because the three of us were all part of the influencer network at Cisco Live.
Yeah.
This week, you're right. This week. Oh my God, it seems so long ago. Where Cisco had a lot of things going on to really help people, not just to get their messaging out on social, but also to connect internally between the exhibitors and the attendees and the actual team. And they had a couple of things going. They had a scavenger hunt that people were taking pictures around San Francisco and posting them. They had a leaderboard that people were really working hard to be the one that had the most tweets up on the leaderboard at the entrance to Moscone South. And, I think events really can use this to major effect. But how much of that are we seeing now? Is that something that, is Cisco right on the leading edge? Who else is doing a really great job of that?
Well, I think that's a great question. Actually, we built for G Summit, which is a conference that I run, which will be in June, we actually built a gamified social media client for events. It's called LiveCube, and it was so successful. I'll just give you this quick kind of thing. It basically takes the socializing at an event and the networking games and the meeting the speakers and the sponsors and connecting with them and interacting on social media and turns it into a game. And we only have about 500, 600 people come to G Summit. It's a small event for people who are actively involved in the industry. We were a top trending topic on Twitter, just the 600 of us, as a result of this game, which is challenging to accomplish for such a small group, right? On like a Tuesday afternoon or whatever. And so the response was so positive, we really kind of taken that and productized it and rolled it out. And it's called LiveCube, and I think you can see it at livecubeapp.com. And it's been getting a whole bunch of traction. Lots of events have been using it. And I think, one of the things that one of the things that I think it really solves, to answer your question about, Cisco on the leading edge, I would say yes, I think Cisco's right in the zone there of wanting to make events more legitimately social and connecting them and adding that kind of game layer to events. Now, putting that all into context, we've been playing games at live events for a very long time. I
Right.
mean, right? Things like a scavenger hunt, people have been doing that for literally thousands of years. So games in live settings are not necessarily new, but now what we have is we have a kind of perfect storm of, everyone's got a smartphone. Data access is fairly ubiquitous, even in cities with terrible 4G like San Francisco. Data access is relatively ubiquitous. Everyone's got a smartphone. We have the responsive or adaptive web, which makes it fast and easy to get online and do things. And everyone is connected to some social graph, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. So you've got all the things that you need, and then you've got all these great game thinkers from the gamification side coming in and saying, hey, let's stitch that all together and make it fun, and then people will do it. And I think that's a critical insight.
That's very cool, and it's interesting to me, and it's really easy for us to understand how gamification works in an event like that, but I think it's a little harder for marketers to understand how they can actually implement this internally in more of an enterprise kind of way. What are some steps that you might suggest people do to get started in understanding how gamification can work in the enterprise?
Well, okay, so this is actually like implementing gamification is a sort of longer process. I think Adam was sort of alluding to this idea that when you actually were working with this gamification company, you realize that there aren't really like these super easy, like just throw some game stuff in and everything just works kind of approaches, and we want to take a more methodological approach. So one thing that we do just as foundational thinking is that we offer online and in-person certification courses that people can take to learn how to gamify things. And at gamification.co, you can read all about those courses, and you can take a live course at G-Summit with me or a bunch of other people who are teaching various live courses around the world and so on. So there's a methodology that you can follow. But just to give you kind of the quick high-level view on it, the very, very first and most important thing is you have to think about what the organization's KPIs are. And what does success mean here? What are we trying to accomplish? And this is a very, very common issue. I think it was, for those of you, I'm sure, who relate to this, at the dawn of the social media era, it was like, we have to be on Facebook. And, people would go, why does the company need to be on Facebook? And it would be like, because everyone's on Facebook. And it's like, okay, well, but what's the business case? Well, everyone's there, we have to do it. And I've actually been actively, as the chief kind of advocate for gamification, I've actually been counter-selling that. I actually push back on that. I don't think people should do gamification just because it's cool or trendy, and certainly not because their core product or service sucks and they're doing a Hail Mary pass to try to get people to give a crap about it.
Save me.
It's not a good strategy.
Well, let me ask you about that, Gabe. So let's say if you're a marketing team, what are the questions that you think people should ask themselves before looking at gamification or in preparation for that?
Yeah, I think this is at the core of it, right? So it's like, what are we trying to accomplish? What does success look like? What are the KPIs? Let's remember that if the core product or service that we're working on does not have good product market fit, using kind of Steve Blank isms, if you don't have good product market fit, gamification is not going to fix that. It actually won't fix it. It's fuel you can throw on a fire that's already lit. But if the fire is not lit, the gas that you pour in it from gamification is just going to put it out. It's not going to actually make it move forward. So you've got to have something core there that actually works. Now you can apply gamification, and you should consider applying it in the very earliest stages of product design. So rather than thinking about it as an adjunct or as something on the side, it actually should be baked in at the core. And I brought up Duolingo. It's a great example of gamification baked in at the core. And Nike Plus, it's gamification baked in at the core. It's not something added later. If you took out the game elements from those two applications, you wouldn't have much. You'd be left with very little kind of pieces of the experience. So they're at their core, they're game-like at their core, and they're game-like from the start. But it doesn't mean that you can't add gamification to things later as well. A number of companies certainly have done that, definitely in the loyalty space. Companies have been very successful, like JetBlue, which has added a whole gamification component to the JetBlue TrueBlue loyalty program with a great deal of success without re-architecting TrueBlue to be more like a game. So there's like many different ways that you can approach it, but at the core, it's like, what are the business objectives? Now, the second thing, I'm sorry, I know you're going to ask a question, but I'll just finish this thought.
Sure.
So the first thing is, what does the business want, and what is success for the business? And the second thing is, what does the player want? And what is success for the player? And this is what we call the user journey or the player journey. Where are they at and where are they going? And how does your product or service help them get there? And I referenced Mad Men at the beginning, but this is like totally classic like Mad Men dialogue. What is the user journey? But in gamification, instead of just thinking about it, what we actually want to do is we actually want to create it in the app and have the user actually pass through that experience and get to where they want to go. And one of my favorite examples of that is from Autodesk. For their 3D modeling software, they actually realized that they had to get users to know how to do 3D modeling because people were downloading the free trial software and then realizing that, oh, geez, 3D modeling is actually really hard. So they download the software and then fall out of it and not buy anything. So Autodesk said, okay, let's find a way to increase the time that people.
Oops. I can't hear you, Janet.
We lost him.
We lost Gabe.
Yeah,
I think he'll come back.
His iPad is what he's on, and that one that cut out. I could see his connection was so as he was on, anyways. But it's interesting because he's talking about a lot of almost customer-facing things, and a particular project we worked on actually happened to be an intranet thing for a major enterprise corporation, one that we all know. And here's
sorry.
No problem. Now is a good time for me to ask my question, Gabe.
Yeah, go for it. Because I just keep talking and talking.
I want to actually have you riff off of it a little bit because some of what you've talked about is a lot of it. I think it has to do with being sort of customer facing. There's some elements of it too that are like, for instance, again, one of the projects that we helped out with was an intranet for an enterprise company that wanted to have some mechanics related to gamification, and part of it had to do with motivating folks, right? Trying to sort of get them moving on to the next step and being able to craft an experience that gets them moving in the direction that this particular corporation would love to see these communities of folks. So it's a bit about community in that sense, and motivating that community as a whole, seeing that competitive nature of leaderboards and stuff like Janet was talking about when we were at Cisco. We as part of this influencer program, and funny enough, all three of us were there. We were competing against each other on this leaderboard to share the most and get the most cool content out there and so on. There's also a little bit of reputation involved sometimes as well, depending on how you're exposed. So for instance, with this particular or in this particular situation, like badges and things, when you look at what your friends have and the type of badges they have and those sorts of things, the awards that they get, there's a reputation element on top of it as well, sort of this badge of honor that's not just sort of like, oh, I got the digital teddy bear, but that Adam happens to be a sushi expert or something like that because he's got a level 4 sushi badge, so you can tell that that's what he likes. Would you say there's some element of reputation as well?
Of course. Reputation is very powerful. We talk about in gamified design a reward system hierarchy called STAPS, which stands for status. And that list is in order of kind of stickiest to least sticky and also cheapest to most expensive. And it hews to a kind of abstracted version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's sort of in a similar kind of idea. And at the core, what you're talking about is status and recognition are very powerful because they're really sticky and they're things that people really want. And once you have them, it really activates your loss aversion, which is people are much more sensitive to losing something they have versus getting something they don't have. So that's one of the important, powerful cycles of status, is that once you have it, you really don't want to give it up. So status, access, power, and stuff are really powerful, and recognition is a really interesting and core part of that.
Now, you actually have talked about mastery, gamification for mastery. Can you talk about, in the past, can you talk about the difference between mastery and winning?
Oh, great question, actually. So winning necessarily means that you have some kind of goal in mind when you set out to do it. And often, and certainly Adam was kind of putting the discussion in the framework of a competition, which it's important to note that people tend to think of gamification index on competition when they think of gamification. They tend to assume that all games must be competitive and that people really care deeply about competition and all this kind of stuff. And I think that that's actually a bias of the creators of these systems rather than the reality of people. Because in practice, people can be competitive, but competition doesn't drive most people's activities on a day-to-day basis. They're much more socially oriented than they are competitively oriented. And so what that means is that more powerful design principles like co-opetition or cooperation are more meaningful and create much stickier, longer-term engagement rather than straight-up competition. So one lesson is, let's step back a little bit from competition as the be-all, end-all solution for everything, and think a little bit more about co-op type design. In fact, at G Summit this year, we have Amy Jo Kim is coming to speak, and she is, like, if not one of the foremost experts on designing co-op experiences. And she's actually going to be talking about how to design gamification for a cooperative environment. So as it relates specifically to the concept of mastery versus winning, mastery is about kind of self-organizing principle for yourself about being really good at something, about getting control over things in the world. And sometimes that's synonymous with winning, when that thing is kind of maybe more external. But when that thing is internal, like in the case of Nike Plus, a user wanting to improve their health, right? Or in the case of something more amusing like the like the Sochi squat machine, which I don't know if you guys know about. I mean, in that case, it's more just a kind of like fun, so mastery of like a fun moment in time. These things are not explicitly competitive. These things are not explicitly about winning. They're more just about control.
Yeah. So lots of times we hear this when we go into companies. They're either, I have to have a Facebook, or I have to try this gamification thing. We've talked about this a little bit already, but what do you say when people go, oh yeah, we're not going there, it's just a fad. Why would we do that? It's just silly. What's the answer?
Well, I mean, that's such a always also the kind of ridiculous other side of that coin, right? Like, things can be both fads and substantive at the same time, right? Like cupcakes.
Social media.
For example. Yeah, social media. Or cronuts. Like, yeah, they're faddish, but they're also really delicious. P.S.
Yes, they are.
So
I got to tweet that right now.
Tweet it.
Gamification is like cronuts. I like
gamification is like cronuts, except in no way. So we have a kind of unique sort of answer to that, I think, which is, fundamentally, this is about behavior change and about organizing people's engagement, and it's about KPIs. So gamification is a tool set to getting you to this engagement goal that you're looking for. And there's lots of case studies that show that it's demonstrably successful, that it's cheaper and more scalable than the alternative, which is usually, by the way, buying people off. The alternative to gamification is that. So it's cheaper and more scalable. It's got lots of success behind it. And oh, by the way, hey, Mr. Executive, you've seen the power of games in your own life, whether you are obsessed with golf or airline frequent flyer program for the person, just the stereotypical person, or Candy Crush for your spouse, or Warcraft or Minecraft for your children. You see how powerful this concept can be all around you. If you don't see the power of games and gamification around you, you just need to point that out to people. Be like, look, right?
I think a lot of people don't understand what gamification really is, though, and that's part of the distinction, that we're talking about today, is that it isn't just Pac-Man. It isn't just leaderboards. There's a lot more to it, and in the education space, it's huge as a way to motivate. Right?
It's because people don't understand the spectrum of complexities in game mechanics. And when you look at somebody who really sits there and refines the mechanics around a gaming experience, you realize that there's a lot more thought that goes into it versus, a Pac-Man may or may not have had a ton of, energy put into it, but at that time it was a sort of an early stage in regards to video game mechanics and what capabilities were available. But if we look at something like the mobile gaming mechanics that we have nowadays, we're not working towards beating games in most cases anymore. We're working simply towards sort of that, okay, we get some digital goods, or competing against friends, or getting an accomplishment and that sort of thing. They're ever growing. Look at something like what's it called, Farmville or something like that. There is no end to these things, but people are
No end.
are spending money and motivated to continue moving forward. But there are real life underpinned mechanics in there that can be applied to an ongoing, getting people to a stickiness factor on a media site, which is what I've seen, or participating in an event, as what Gabe said, or being a part of an intranet or a company, right?
So here's the thing. Before, when we were talking and we got cut off, where I was going with that, just to kind of summarize, is that you've got what the user wants and you've got what the company wants, and then you also have what a system needs to kind of feed itself, right? The inputs and the outputs. Sometimes that's engagement, cash. Users pay with their time, they pay with their money, or they pay with their social graph, right? So those are their forms of payment. So you've got the forms of payment, you've got the company's needs, and you've got the user needs. In gamification, the really hard part of our art form is that we try to align all those three things in the design. And that's why it's actually not trivial to do, right? That's why really shallow versions of it fall flat for people, because unless you do the deep thinking and put those three things together and try to align them as much as possible, you don't get where you need to go.
I have a post on that because I love what you were just talking about. Like the forms of payment is really, I love that stuff. I'd love to look more on that.
You're right. We should do a more deep discussion on that. Actually, I've certainly talked about it before, and other social game designers have talked about it. It was the classic Farmville model, right? And one of the things that's to understand, part of the reason why social games like Farmville were so good at separating people from their money was the fact that when you were playing, you would reach a point in the game where the game would say, oh, hey, you're going to need a bigger tractor to keep growing your farm because you've reached the kind of limits of what you have right now. And it's totally cool. You can absolutely have this tractor for free. You just need to wait. Or if you have a few dollars, you could skip the line right now and just get this tractor right now.
One cookie now, or how much are you willing to pay for the 2 cookies later, right?
Yeah, and really it's about a function of time and effort. And so they always allowed you to pay in these alternative currencies, which were pretty much effort and social graph or time, right, if they're able to monetize them, or cash. And that is a very powerful type of currency. And one of the things, I do a lot of work in my consultancy, which is called Dopamine. I do a lot of work with big companies. And one of the things I'm constantly trying to advocate with them is I'm like, you need to accept other forms of payment from your client. If you don't value the social promotion of your customers, and I don't mean value it like give them 100 points in your frequent flyer program. I mean, like, if you don't really value that, if you're not really giving them something substantively of value for social promotion and for the time they spend with you, not just the money, you're really missing the point about the currency of the real world today.
Gabe, just a couple things before we move on to our next section. I want to ask you, like, obviously, Game Summit's coming up in June. If anybody's in the San Francisco area, what I really like about the conference, and it's not just to pimp your conference, it's like you really do have a lot of workshops and certifications, and it really is, in my mind, one of the more seriously educational conferences I've seen. Obviously, your book, Gamification Revolution, but what are some, like, if someone wanted to, like, get deeper, because one of the problems is that there really is a disconnect. People see gamification as badges and leaderboards when they first enter, and there's really a lot more things about structure and flow that they need to understand. And so what are some free resources or low-cost resources that they can also go and start getting their biting into a little more something meaty?
Yeah, great question. So at gamification.co, we have a getting started guide, which actually kind of walks you through, like, what is gamification, how do you get to it, and what resources are there, and so on. And there's a database of examples, and one of the things that's such a new design discipline, it's very far ahead of research, specific kind of research. So there's not that much, like, published research that you can look at and say, oh, gamification is doing this or that. Now that's catching up, but it's taking a while, and we're really drawing from all these different disciplines. So I recommend that everybody look at case studies and examples that they think are meaningful. So
what was the website again?
Gamification.co.
And where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at @gzicherm, which is part of my name, GZICHERM. And also, if you just, like, want to find out more, you can also be my friend on Facebook. I love Facebook and sharing pictures of what I'm eating. And if
Gabe,
you
I want to be a friend.
yeah, totally, you guys. I'll give you a big hug. And if you want, and if you ever like forget any of those things, if you just type like gamification Gabe into the amazing Google, you will retrieve me.
I'm surprised you didn't buy the domain Gabification.
I know, that's actually what I was thinking too.
Why do you think I don't own that? Of course I own it. It doesn't do anything.
I don't know. I think dopamine is a really great domain.
Dopamine is so much more awesome.
It's just awesome.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks so much, and we're gonna move on to our shares, and I think we're gonna have Janet here kick off something she found fascinating this week.
Oh wait, am I ready? Oh yeah, I am. I thought it was really interesting that LinkedIn brought out this new How You Rank tool that actually goes into your profile and it shows you what percentage of views you get compared to the rest of your connections. So you can see how many views your profile's getting and kind of where you rank within that. And I think it's going to be really interesting as more and more people are being able to blog and they're getting better traffic. How much are people really going to chase that rank, and who cares? Does anybody care?
There's there's enough of a group of people, right, that actually care. I mean,
yeah.
I think there's a spectrum of folks who care, don't care, are kind of in the middle of what is the value of this and is there any value, right? But there's likely enough. I think
if you're looking for a job, then it's certainly going to really, really help. To get that up there, and if you're constantly looking, if you're maybe a consultant like us, almost all of us, then I think that's going to be useful too. But it's just really interesting how they're rolling things out. I'm kind of hoping that it's going to mean that the endorsement thing is going to go away, because I really hate that.
I'm not sure how you see that as a factor in it going away.
Well, I'm hoping that they're moving on to something more quantitative or qualitative. Because I have a friend who's rated for underwater basket weaving.
Well,
and I think it's really vital that she does,
Although this is not on, we weren't talking about the endorsements. The endorsements essentially were mapped to skills, right? And skills were something that they had on LinkedIn for a long time, and skills are actually tied into the search engine. So it is, in a way, part of LinkedIn SEO that people don't realize that. They look at it as, again, this sort of gamified way of saying, let's see what skills I have the best and then show off to other people. And so, go ahead, Steve.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to finish your thought.
Yeah, so I was going to say, not that connects directly to, I haven't been able to dig, I knew this thing came out, Janet, you're talking about ranking profiles. I've not been able to see it in the week that we've been all running around and things, so I want to take a direct look at it. But, I think those other things actually had connections to data that LinkedIn really wanted to have, but in addition to it, they collected more data by gamifying a certain element. Now, in this instance, I don't know if they're collecting more data with what they're doing or just displaying it and making you feel, insignificant when you look at Steve's profile and see, the vast folks looking at his. I'm going to look at this link here. But Steve, you had a comment on it?
No, I was just going to say, in terms of the rankings, do we know what the factors are for ranking?
It looks like it's ranking based on your connections. So, mine, for example, is I'm 503 out of 2,700 connections. So some of those
against your own data set or your own.
Yeah, it's really amongst your connections. And so if you've gone out and gotten a lot of connections that never update, they're probably going to lay there fallow anyway. So I don't know how.
Gabe, are you familiar with this at all? Have you seen this?
Yeah. Sure. This is an amplification. And last year, LinkedIn sent out those emails that was like, you're in the top 1%, you're in the top 2%, 5%, right? Okay. This was such a success for LinkedIn. The social media attention for LinkedIn on LinkedIn, it's been the single biggest thing that's ever happened to them, apparently, on multiple levels. And that's because of this sort of whole status orientation. Yeah. So I think they're kind of feeding off of that. They decided to make this a more permanent feature. and a more ongoing feature rather than just like a once a year kind of email where we're also, by the way, your rankings aren't going to change very much in terms of the top percentiles. So they need to make it more personal and more intimate for you.
I get what they're doing. I can see what they're doing right now. So rather than this being, I mean, this is bragging rights, but at the same time, what it is it's now the question that's going to pop into so many people's heads. How do I increase this metric, right? Mm-hmm. And how do you increase it is by optimizing your profile or doing whatever you need to do in order to increase visibility of your profile. It's like suddenly being able to see what keywords you rank for and going, you know what, I actually want to rank higher for this particular keyword. Now you ask, how do I do that? And then you start to optimize against that. And that's, we had Viveka talk about this and look at everybody's, look at Steve's profile and in that episode you can hear some really good pointers potentially of how to raise your visibility against other folks. Because I'm just looking at it against my connections, which is interesting, rather than say looking at it against other people with a similar title or in a similar industry or something like that. But it indeed makes me want to look at it and go, what am I not doing with my profile to not get higher up on this particular...
Absolutely.
Well, and don't you think that they're using it as another way to get a longer stay on LinkedIn? Because they want us to come back and interact more, because that's one of the things that LinkedIn has been really trying to figure out. How are they going to work that out? They've added video now, and they've added blogging. So they're really trying to make the site stickier.
Yeah, I don't want to...
Notice that stuff is things like blogging and video, to me, authentic. And I think that's part of the reason why they're not very successful, is because that's kind of like the classic badly thought through social media stuff. Like, if we just put up a forum, people will use it. Instead of actually going out, what is this product about? That's why this kind of gamification stuff on LinkedIn is so much more successful on LinkedIn than it is on many other sites that have tried to do it, is because, let's face it, we mostly use LinkedIn to either A, when we're looking for a job, or B, we're looking to hire people. That's what we're using it for. Those are high tension. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, they're more sort of fluid, and they're more amenable to the kinds of gamification that LinkedIn's actually doing. So I actually think that they do an excellent job on a long-term level of really thinking through what kinds of game mechanics are meaningful to their audience. The other stuff, I think, is like, sad trombone.
Bad
social network.
Totally. Some of the issues, I mean, because as a consultant, I try to do good practices around, ranking kinds of stuff. But the downside, like, just looking at Twitter and like some of the things like around Twitter, like clout. One of the things that I used to follow people, all kinds of people, regardless of their value or clout, just because I talked to people and it was much more engaging. But I got penalized on ratings if I didn't talk to other high-numbered people, and so there's this like kind of there's that not a good feedback loop about where there's at least some mix up. If I'm talking to people like people like you and Adam and Janet, my score goes up. If I talk to like Susie Q from whatever, just ask me something, I don't get as much. I don't get as many bump from that kind of thing. How do you fight against that? I mean, like, if you're designing something like that, how do you introduce some level of where you're not penalizing people for like talking to talking to people who are below their clout score?
Well, that to me feels like a mistake in the design, right? I mean, that would be my my sense of that. And I think part of what we do whenever we're trying to do good agile, whenever we're trying to do gamification well, we try those things is put a feature out, see how the feature works, get feedback on it, roll it back, move it forward, roll it back, move it forward. And so, I think there's some brilliance in the design there that they were trying to express. They just didn't do it very brilliant.
And before, so we're going to move on to Adam has a comment.
Just something that I noticed in, big data has been a term that we talk about, that folks are talking about a lot over the last year or two, especially and data being collected primarily from the social networks and so on. But one of the things I noticed from us being at this conference at Cisco Live this last week was that data was their whole theme was the Internet of Things. It was everything being connected, being able to communicate to each other via the Internet. And this is something Cisco, of course, wants to be a big part of powering. But an underlying element is when everything is connected, it's all about exchange of data. And then ultimately, it's also about a deeper insight into data over a broader, selection of things, because instead of it just being about data from our mobile devices, now it's data from this particular widget and this particular device and our car and all that sort of thing talking to each other. So in general, I just thought put it out to you guys who are also there, and of course Gabe. I think it's sort of signaling that data is even more important right now for marketers and those who want to have obviously serious positions in some sort of business and marketing function to really understand how to be data literate. I mean, that's a pretty soft. I mean, it's common sense, kind of, but at the same time, not. What do you guys think? Silence. Steve's on mute. There you go.
Well, I'm all for being data literate. I don't know how to.
But I mean, it emphasizes even more to me than it ever did before that it's not just about web and mobile, related stuff, because the web is the web. But we're talking about, instead of just behavior on my website or behavior on my mobile app, we're talking actually about behavior connected to everything that somebody might be touching within the store, out of the store. I mean, almost any job that you're going to be at. There's going to be some level of data involved, and you have to be able to read it. They were showing a whole train conducting.
Oh, yeah, that was fascinating.
Too, right? And although that's not a marketing. Go ahead, sorry.
They showed the Internet of Things is related to a train system and bring all that data together, and it was actually a pretty good demonstration. Well, and you're talking about more. Go ahead.
I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Gabe.
Oh no! All I was going to say about this is, one observation that we have as well, best practice, gamification best practice. Users something of value before you ask them for something, and this has been a very, very like game-changing, small game-changing design idea that comes from social games, where the user is allowed to like get something or win something before they have to tell you even who they are or what they're doing or any of that kind of stuff. And I think increasingly you'll start to see this like idea that you've got to give users something of real value in exchange for their data. And as we think about the Internet of Things, that's going to have to be more baked in, because it's not even about like, oh, let's fill out this form on my mobile phone before I walk into your store. Like, you know what I mean? So it's got to be more inherent. And yeah. Sorry.
One of the things that came up through that, though, is, and kind of, we've talked about on the show before, is that, they were talking about the Internet of everything to the point that I don't need to ask for your data. I have your data. And I have your data on so many different fields that you didn't even know. I know where your phone is. One of the images that I put up while we were at the conference was a heat map of every digital device in Moscone Center and where they all were and what access points they were accessing right then. And it was really cool and really scary at the same time, because I
missed that. That's awesome.
Oh, the amount of and really, they're gathering it everywhere. You go into the grocery store, they're watching you with cameras to find out which shelf you pause at and whether you're looking high or low on the shelf. All of that information is gathered about us all the time. And I don't think we can say that we can opt out anymore. So how are we going to, manage that as marketers in particular? We get all this data in, sure, it's tons of data, but then what are we going to do with that data?
But I think that's a little bit like big data. Is like people go big data. Oh, where we're going to start, and the reality is what people do is somebody sits down and goes, hey, let's write an algorithm to pull out this piece of data and do something with it. And I think it's going to be with big data. It's the same thing. I mean, all the examples that Cisco showed was like somebody sitting down and going, what do we want to try to do, and how do we tie that together? And they even mentioned in like the train system, maximizing tracks and doing all this other kinds of stuff, that they actually added additional computer power all along the track to give them that data. So they did intentional things as opposed to like looking at all this data and going, oh, where do we start, or all these things.
How do you
They said,
filter
here's
it?
what we want to do, and they pull those pieces together. And I think that the Internet of Things and big data will continue to be where we go, hey, you know what, it'd be cool if we could do this, and we might be able to do that if we pulled these pieces together.
But that's exactly what I'm talking about, Steve. Exactly what you're saying is it's something that people now may not have the skills or believe that they should do, but I believe like right now where you've got a lot of folks saying in communications and marketing and sales, if you don't understand how to use digital or social media in general, that you might fall behind the curve, and then eventually there's going to come a time where you're just going to be irrelevant. You're not going to get a job because if you don't have these basic, sort of table stakes skills in the future. I'm thinking the same thing as what you were just saying is if you don't have the ability to say what do we need and what do we want to get out of it and how do we want to use it, and then ultimately pick that data up and use it, you as a company are going to fall behind the curve of everybody else and eventually become irrelevant and not have a job, because that's going to be a table stakes skill. In order to play with with anybody, you sit at the same table with them, you're going to have those skills.
We live now in a time of always be learning, and people can feel overwhelmed by this stuff, or they can just choose to read 1 or 2 posts a day. Just kind of rotate it through, have a set of bloggers, and just kind of keep reading just a little bit every day, and just do that as a lifelong process. And it won't be that scary because you can keep learning, and you'll be able to adapt the stuff.
Agreed.
So on that note, you want to hear more about our fantastic Janet Fouts? Where can they find you?
You can find me at jfouts on Twitter or at janetfouts.com.
And Mr. Secret Sushi, where can they find you, sir?
Secret Sushi or Adam Helway.
And I am Steve Farnsworth, or Steveology on Twitter, or the Steveology blog, and I don't even know what that is. It's freaking me out. I don't even know.
The little thing from Cisco. Oh, you weren't there, so you didn't see it.
I wasn't part of the cool kids, apparently. Anyway, so thank you so much. You can catch us on Spreaker, iHeart Radio, and subscribe on iTunes, watch us on YouTube, or visit us on the FridayHangout.com. Gabe, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, you guys.
And all our viewers, we love your faces. Catch you next week.
Tons of fun. Thanks, you guys.